Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell and Company, it is my pleasure to welcome you to First Look Giving USA 2013, brought to you free of charge as a service to all of our friends in the nonprofit community. We are delighted to tell you that we have actually over 600 registered today. Before Peter and Edith begin the session, I'd like to quickly review some webinar logistics that will be helpful to you whether or not you are new to our webinars. So first, to ensure that you have the best webinar experience possible, please follow these tips. Close any programs other than GoToWebinars, of course, that are running on your computer. Call in using a cell phone instead of using your computer speakers. Move away your cell phones from your computer. And finally, if you've experienced any visual issues, please contact GoTo at 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last about 90 minutes, and you will earn 1.5 continuing education credits for your participation. That's good for certification with CFRE International. And following the presentation, we will send you a link to be able to get all those documents. And now you might be wondering how to send your questions to Edith, Peter, and our panel. You can open the chat section in the panel on the right, and you'll see an instant messaging window. Type in your question and click send. And we have reserved time at the end of our session, but obviously you can send your questions at any time. And now I'd like to introduce Peter Fissinger, who will present the Giving USA findings, and Edith Falk, who will lead the discussion with our panel. Edith, in turn, will introduce the members of our panel. Peter Fissinger is Campbell & Company's President and Chief Executive Officer and has more than 27 years of professional experience in institutional advancement. He has worked in a wide range of nonprofit sectors, including education, healthcare, culture, and human services, and on campaigns with goals ranging from $5 million to $5 billion. Peter is chair of the Advisory Council on Methodology for Giving USA and a member of the board of the Giving Institute. He is also a frequent presenter at institutional advancement conferences, including AFP and CASE. Peter is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross. Edith Falk is a founding member of Campbell & Company and is engaged in designing and providing strategic fundraising and marketing counsel to a broad spectrum of clients. Edith has served as president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Chicago Chapter Board, member of the National Board, and dean of the Executive Leadership Institute. She serves on the boards of the Donors Forum and the American Council for International Education and is a past chair of the Giving USA Foundation. And now I'd like to welcome Peter Fissinger. Peter?
Thank you very much. And on behalf of my colleagues at Campbell & Company and our panelists, I want to welcome you to this event. We really look forward to this presentation and discussion. It's a fun day for us here at Campbell & Company. Let's start by just taking a look at a photograph of what philanthropy can help accomplish. This is a picture of a mobile health clinic in Bangladesh, and if you purchase the Giving USA book, you'll be treated to more photographs and illustrations just like this one here. Let's talk for just a minute about what Giving USA is. It tracks the sources of giving, the types of recipients, the rates of change, and various trends in giving on a macro basis in the United States. It's published annually. Also important, trends in volunteering and trends in the number of nonprofit organizations. It's the longest running annual report about philanthropy in the United States. It is published by the Giving USA Foundation, which is affiliated with Giving Institute, a consortium of some of the leading fundraising consulting firms in the country, which was at one time called the AFRC. It's made possible by contributions from Giving Institute member firms, foundations, and other donors, and we work with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, who actually does the research on our behalf. And let's get right to the information. Last year, 2012, we had a total of $316.23 billion contributed philanthropically in this country. And what we're able to see here is that there's an overall increase of about 3.5% over last year. That's a little bit more moderate if you look at inflation-adjusted dollars, just 1.5%. But we're happy that this is the third consecutive year of growth since the recession. And if we're able to keep at this rate of growth, it's still going to be probably 6 or 7 years before we return to the pre-recession level of giving, which, when adjusted for inflation, is $344 billion. So the growth is positive, but we'd like to see it pick it up see it pick up in the future. And we think that if the economic trends will allow us will continue to pick up, that we'll see greater growth in philanthropy. One other thing I like always to say when we show this pie is the extent to which giving is dominated by individuals. You see the yellow band on your screen. It's $228 billion, or really $229 billion, 72% of the total. You can also see bequests, which account for 7% of the total. What some don't know is that in the foundation category, where we have 15% of the total, 45% of that total is estimated to be family foundations. And when you add all those up, that would be 6% of that 15%. You have 72% from individuals, 7% from bequest donors, and 6% from family foundations, equaling 86% of the $316.23 billion. So let's see what's happening here. We know that the economy, there are a lot of things that drive philanthropy in various organizations, in different markets, and in different sectors. But overall, across the country, the biggest driver in philanthropy is the economy. And here are some of the key economic indicators. The S&P 500 was up 13.4% last year. You might think then that philanthropy would have grown more than 3.5%, but there are some other indicators we want to share with you. Personal disposable income only went up 3.3%. Unemployment was averaged at 8.1%, and that is down. I think it was 8.9% the prior year and 9.1% before that. But the 50-year average is 6.1%. Probably the most important indicator of philanthropy is personal consumption, which went up 3.6% last year, and that speaks to how people feel about their financial security and their ability to do things that they want to do, and philanthropy is one thing that we know many people want to do. If we look again, the way the economy drives philanthropy, the darker bars on your screen denote years where the economy is growing, and the lighter bars are recession years. And what we see overall is that philanthropy grows virtually every year. It grows more slowly in recessionary years. So we see the late 90s when the economy was really doing well, and we see that steep ramp up from 96 to about 2000, and then we see the economy slowed down in 2001. Remember 9/11, it had an impact on the economy. The growth of philanthropy slowed as well. And then we have just a few years where giving has actually decreased, and 2 out of the 3 years in history happened during the recent Great Recession. And now we are recovering, albeit not at a very fast pace yet, but we do see 3 consecutive years of growth. Since 1972, giving has hovered at around 2% of the gross domestic product. And, you know, we'd like to talk about strategies where we could advance that percentage, because this would have the single largest effect on philanthropy of any of these statistics that we're going to show you today. It has been as high as 2.2%, but in 2012 it was back at 2% of gross domestic product. Let's take a look at the sources of giving over a 2-year span. Again, the total was up 3.5%. That's your yellow band. And the second band from the top, the prior year it was up 4.2%, with a 2-year total of an increase in philanthropy of almost 8%. When you look at giving from individuals, the growth in the past 2 years has been 3.3% and 3.9% respectively, for a total of 7.3%. Now you see gradual growth. It's fairly consistent. We'd like to see that individual giving growth rate pick up in the future. Foundations were up 7% 2 years ago, and just 4.4% for a total of 11.7% over a 2-year period. Bequests, for those of you who have followed this data, you know that this is the area that is most likely to fluctuate. 2 years ago, it was up 9.6%. This year, it's estimated to be down 7%. We'll say more about that, but this is a category where the needle can really be moved by a mega bequest, and that is the case that we saw 2 years ago. And then corporations, many see this as a very interesting story. You know, it was up 12.2%. I want to remind you that corporations are still just a small percentage of the overall total, but the fact that they were up 12.2% is very interesting. We're going to say some more about that in a minute. Let's take a closer look at these various sectors. And this screen, what it allows you to see is how philanthropy in this sector has grown since 1972, and you're able to see that in inflation adjusted and in current dollars. And you see they mirror each other very closely. Current dollars is, the way we count money, the way we count how you've done in your nonprofit organization. Inflation adjusted dollars shows the buying power of that philanthropy. And giving from individuals was finished at $228.93 billion last year. Again, that was 72% of the total. It's an increase of 3.9%. And there's some very interesting things going on here. First of all, I'd like to note that 2 out of 3 households in this country make a gift philanthropically during the course of the year. That comes out to an average of $2,000 per household. But 80% of the total comes from donors who itemize on their taxes, and so there's a bit of a slant in the totals toward those who have greater capacity to give. And what's going to motivate them to give? Well, it's the economic indicators that we talked about: the stock market, personal income, personal consumption, unemployment, whether or not they have a job, obviously. We think there are some other things that have impacted giving as well. We think the dialogue about the government deficits and sequestration toward the end of the year may have impacted some. The discussion around the charitable deduction, whether or not it was going to be continued in the future. One thing that we know is that predictability, certainty, and strong economic times encourage individual giving. Let's move on to talk a little bit about giving by foundations. It was $45.74 billion last year, an increase of 4.4%. Now, you might think, as foundations give out of the value of their assets, with the stock market being up in double digits last year, that maybe the growth would have been greater. But in fact, they operate off a 12-quarter rounding average of assets. And this is really good when the market goes down, because foundations are able to maintain their giving. But we see the growth in response to the market to be a little bit slower than just an immediate cause effect. One thing that we want to remind you is that 45% of this total is family foundations, and so those entities tend to act more like people rather than institutional giving patterns, and we did see only 3.5% increase in giving from individuals. And the other thing is that community foundation giving was up 9% last year, which is a very positive sign for many organizations and communities around the country. Giving by bequest, as I said, this category can fluctuate year to year. It was actually $23.41 billion estimated, a decrease of 7%. And that might seem surprising, but I just want to point out that 2 years ago there was a $2.5 billion bequest from Margaret Cargill that went to the Margaret Cargill Family Foundation. And so that's a big enough gift to actually move the needle. There were no bequests we know of that were even as large as $1 billion last year. There were a couple that were in the $500 to $600 million range. One thing that we've noted here at Campbell & Company is that those organizations that plan and execute plan giving programs in an ongoing fashion tend to see their program of philanthropy grow over time, and they can be protected from economic downturns as well. I always like to equate this to an exercise program. If you do it every day, over time, it pays benefits. You might not see the return right away, but we really encourage organizations to invest some resources in their planned giving program and to build that population of people who include their charity in their estates. Giving by corporations, again, very interesting, was up 12.2%, a total of $18.15 billion last year. Corporate profits were up almost 17% last year, and so that's part of the formula here. But there's some research coming out that indicates that as much as half of all corporate giving may be coming in non-cash gifts. And on top of that, it is estimated in this research that 70% of that total is pharmaceutical giving, which is wonderful that pharmaceutical companies are giving out drugs to people who need them around the world. They're helping to cure various diseases around the world, but it can skew the impact felt at home by corporate giving. Another thing that we're seeing in the corporate giving trend is they're becoming increasingly strategic relative to their mission about how they give, and sometimes this means that certain organizations that have relied on corporate giving in their hometown in the past aren't receiving the same kind of support that they have. So the way corporate giving feels in some communities is not synonymous with this impact or this increase of 12.2% last year. Let's take a look at the trends here. What we see really since 1973 overall, the trends that we see reflect what we've discussed, that individual giving drives giving, and to the extent that it may have lost some share from 81.9% to 72.3% over this total trend, we see a correlating increase in foundation giving. And remember, we're seeing a lot of wealthier individuals strategically create family foundations. They're transferring assets, and that's how they do their giving in the future. So for the most part, this pattern is unchanged since 1973. Let's take a look at the uses. Where did all this giving go? And we'll start with giving to religion, which is 32% of the total last year, followed by education, 13% of the total, human services, also 13% of the total. They're in a real race there, those two entities. Giving to foundations, 10% of the total, healthcare, 9%, public society benefit, we'll talk more about that in a minute. It came in at 7%, and then international affairs, arts and culture, and environment and animals. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about each of these sectors. Giving to religion, a 2-year picture. First of all, it was up 4.3% 2 years ago. Last year, down just a little bit for a total increase over 2 years of 4.1%. The growth in this sector is slowing down considerably. I'm going to say more about that in just a minute. Giving to education was up 3.5% 2 years ago and 7% this past year. One of the interesting things to me about this slide is you pull out 3 of the yellow bands on this slide. See education, see arts, culture, and humanities, you see environment and animals, and you see 3 sectors that are growing at around twice the rate of overall giving growth last year. When you add to that giving to health and human service have returned to their pre-recessionary levels across this whole picture, you see some pretty positive indicators. And so giving to education was up 7% last year. Human service giving up 3.8% on the heels of a 1.7 modest increase, 1.7% the prior year, a total of 5.6%. And then foundations were way up 2 years ago, and this year have actually receded a little bit. And I'll say some more about that when we get to an individual slide on the topic. Public society benefit up 5.4%, almost exact same growth the prior year. And then international affairs, if you look over a 10-year period, this is the largest growth area, but last year that growth slowed considerably to 2.5%. Let's talk a little bit more about giving to religion. This has always been the greatest destination for philanthropy when you look at the overall picture. It still is 32% of the pie, $101.54 billion, but it is consistently losing market share, if you will. There was an interesting study done last year that found that there are more Americans describing themselves as unaffiliated with any house of worship than ever before. On top of that, many Americans who might be affiliated don't go to church or synagogue every single week, and we believe that this is impacting philanthropy to religion in a significant way over time. The larger question might be to what extent, if at all, this could impact all philanthropy, because many people feel this is where they learn to give, by going to church or synagogue every week, spending time with their community, first giving back to their church and their synagogue, and then having those entities support human service endeavors. The flip side of that might be that philanthropy has matured to the point where people are becoming direct donors to things that they're involved in, and it's not so much their church or synagogue today as it is their school, their museum, and a human service organization that they may be involved in. So this is an area that we're going to take a close look at in coming years, because we want to know more about this sector and why the growth is slowing to the degree that it is. Going to giving to education, as I said, 13% of the total, $41.33 billion, an increase of 7% last year. We see in this increase evidence of the economic recovery. This is a sector to which wealthy individuals with appreciated assets do make investments in educational institutions of their choice. And I know one of our panelists is going to talk about this a little bit. We'll be very interested to hear what he has to say. A lot of the colleges and universities with which Campbell and Company is working is feeling increasingly confident about their ability to plan and implement comprehensive campaigns. And so we think that the 7% here is one of those signs that the economy is really recovering. Back up one there. There we go. Giving to human services last year, $40.40 billion, 3.8% growth. It's kind of the flip side of education. If you look at this chart, you're able to see that in real dollars and in inflation-adjusted dollars, philanthropy mostly grew during the recession. And the reason for that, we believe, is that those that give to a wide range of organizations may have sort of doubled down in their human service giving. They want to make sure that they're supporting basic human needs in times of real crisis. We also see response to disasters. It was about $283 million to Hurricane Sandy last year. So this is the real response to human need. But when the economy starts to recover, growth in this area tends to slow down. And some donors, in addition to continuing to support human service, also support other entities. And sometimes they make pretty big investments in other kinds of organizations. Giving to foundations. Last year was a little over $30 billion. It actually decreased 4.6%. Now remember, this comes on a, I don't know if you know this, I don't know how you would remember, but this is estimated on a 3-year rolling estimate. And recall also that there was a $2.5 billion bequest to a foundation 2 years ago. So we think that this accounts for some of the decrease in giving to this sector. Also, what we've seen over time, a lot of giving to this sector has been transfers from individuals into family foundations. When you see those really big spikes upward, we think that that accounts for a significant amount of the growth in this area. Giving to health is one that we believe at Campbell and Company, one of the most exciting sectors right now, where a lot of healthcare organizations on the heels of healthcare reform are really focusing on philanthropy as an important revenue source and investing in philanthropic programs and trying to think of ways to help make their entire community healthier, and then to ask for philanthropy in support of that. Last year was $28.12 billion, up 4.9%. And again, we believe that this is an area where we're going to continue to see growth possibly in the future. Giving to public society benefit is $21.63 billion, an increase of 5.4% last year. These are the entities that seek philanthropy and then redistribute it to worthwhile causes. The United Ways and the Jewish federations across the country fit into this category, and it was nice to see a little bit of growth in this area, because some feel that this kind of institutional giving is slowing down. But in fact, we see some of these organizations reorganizing how they go about philanthropy, beginning to move away, in the case of United Way, moving away somewhat from workplace giving to other kinds of major gift fundraising. And there still are those who believe they'd like to make a gift to an entity that's able to figure out the best place for that money to go. Where is the need the greatest? What organization can fill that need? This is also the category under which donor-advised funds is tracked. And this is an area in the Council on Methodology. We'd like to break that out in the future. It's proven to be a little bit complicated, but there's been a significant trend toward donor-advised funds. And it's like family foundations, but it's tracked in a different area, and we're curious to know whether that might be clouding the results in this category a little bit. Giving to international affairs, $19.11 billion, a growth of just 2.5% last year. I say just because if you look over a 10-year period and take a look at the ramp there from 2000 up to about 2010, I mean, it's just really remarkable. It's the biggest area of growth in all of this research. And there are a couple of things, first of all, that I'd like to note. First of all, we believe that many donors are increasingly seeing themselves as citizens of the world rather than just citizens of a neighborhood or a city or a community or even a region. And so they're thinking more globally when they think about their philanthropy. As far as the slower growth rate this year, it could be, although we don't know, it could be that there, fortunately there were no truly significant international disasters last year that generated philanthropy. Remember, a significant amount of international giving is also human service giving, and people do respond to need in a very spontaneous way. And fortunately, there wasn't any significant event like that last year. Giving to arts, culture, and humanity was $14.44 billion last year, an increase of 7.8%, considerably greater growth than you see overall in philanthropy. And this is a sector that we think is finally recovering from the recession. It is arguably the sector most hurt by the recession. Campbell and Company has conducted research in arts and culture organizations, and we know that generally speaking, the average arts and culture donor is more educated than the average donor in general, tends to be more wealthy, tends to live in urban areas, and he or she tends to make significant investments in their favorite arts and culture organizations when the economy is very strong. So we see really big gifts when the market's strong of appreciated assets, $100 million gifts sometimes to arts and culture organizations. But when the economy slows down considerably, many of those donors, we believe, are the donors that respond to basic human need, and they may reduce their giving to arts and culture organizations. We think we really saw that. You can see that downward trend in around 2008 up until now, so we've been glad to see the growth return there. Giving to environment and animals, again, this is an area that can build major gift support toward significant environmental issues. There are a lot of organizations around the world which are able to build major gift programs, and wealthy individuals who care about the environment can make substantial gifts to this sector. So it's another area we think that reflects the strength in the stock market last year. Just take a look at this overall chart, which has lots and lots of colors on it. How analytical is that? Let's take a look at what's been happening overall. As I said, giving to religion seems to be reducing in its share of the total. Now, understand it is overall, it is still growing, but its share of the total is declining. If you look at international affairs, you can see that share of the total is increasing considerably, and overall foundations have increased over time. And so it's a very interesting picture. We still see substantial philanthropy, still 2% of the gross domestic product, but where the philanthropy is going seems to be shifting over time. A couple of other things that we wanted to point out. First of all, there are over 1 million 501c3s in this country, and so it is a very competitive marketplace. One of the things that we like to remind nonprofit fundraisers of all the time is that donors want to make an impact in the things that they care about, and they really have choices about where to give. And so it's our job to build a resonant case for support and build lasting relationships with them and help them achieve what they care about. And if we don't do that well, they have other places that they can give to. We have seen that the number of nonprofit organizations reduce a little bit. Some went out of business. Some smart ones merged into areas where they could, other organizations where they could continue to fulfill their mission. But there's still quite a bit of competition out there. And one way to build support for your organization is to encourage people to volunteer. There are 64 million people who volunteered at one nonprofit or another last year, and it's just a very straight relationship. The degree to which people are involved, which can be demonstrated by their volunteer time spent, is a direct indicator of whether they're going to give to your organization and how much they may give to your organization in the future. And let me just finish with one other picture about philanthropy. Here's a volunteer tutor in the United Way, Central Indiana, reading to a couple of youngsters there. And again, if you purchase the book, you'll see other photographs. And with that, I want to turn this over to my colleague, Edith Falk, who's going to engage our panelists in some lively discussion. Edith?
Thank you, Peter. And Welcome to all our friends and colleagues across the country who've joined us for our annual conversation about Giving USA. It's always so fascinating and exciting to see the results of giving in the prior year when these are finally released, and to see what our expert friends at the Lilly School have estimated are the results and trends in giving, and to really look at that in the context of our own organization and see what information we can glean from that. So we're joined by an exceptional panel of practitioners who represent some of the leading nonprofit organizations and philanthropists across the country. And they're going to help us reflect on and react to the information we've just heard and help us put this in a real-life context. So before I introduce them, let me just describe our plan for the next 45 minutes or so. While we're talking, after I've introduced the panelists, you'll see a series of data points that will scroll across the screen, and they'll rotate throughout the panel discussion. I'm going to kick off the discussion with a few questions I've prepared for our panelists, and then I'll turn to the audience for your questions. So I've seen a number of questions come in already, so continue to type these into the live chat box, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can during the live webinar. And for those that we're not able to answer while we're on the webinar, we promise in the next several days to get the answers out for the remainder of the questions to all of you. So we have an extraordinary panel of seasoned nonprofit leaders representing different segments within the nonprofit field. And I'm extraordinarily grateful to each of them for taking the time to be with us today and to share their thoughts and perspectives. We have more detailed information on each of them in the materials that you received prior to the webinar, but I'm just going to say a few words. So Judy Belk is the Senior Vice President for Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, overseeing the agency's 3 regional offices in Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, where she's currently located. RPA is one of the world's largest philanthropic service organizations, offering counsel and management assistance to individuals, families, corporations, and foundations. RPA currently advises and manages upward of $200 million in annual giving. So Judy and her colleagues really have their fingers on the pulse of how some of our major donors are thinking about their philanthropy. Judy has over 25 years in strategic planning, international giving, corporate social responsibility, and family philanthropy. Before joining RPA, she was the Vice President of Global Public Affairs for Levi Strauss & Company, where she had responsibilities for both the company and the foundation's leadership in the global fight against AIDS, as well as its economic development, environmental, and anti-racism initiatives. Judy also managed the philanthropic programs for the former Mervyn's division of Target Corporation. She's a frequent writer and speaker on organizational ethics, race, and social change, and she serves on the board of the Sturgeon Foundation and the Marlborough School, which is the Los Angeles-based independent school for girls. Joining us from our nation's capital is John Lippincott, President of the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. CASE, as it is known, serves 3,600 educational institutions, colleges, universities, independent schools, and nonprofit educational associations in 76 countries, and serves their advancement professionals who work on their behalf in the fields of alumni relations, communications, fundraising, and marketing operations. Named to the position in 2004, John is the longest-serving president since CASE was founded. Under his presidency, he has helped grow the organization to become one of the largest associations of education-related institutions in the world. And during his tenure, he has overseen growth in CASE Europe, the establishment of CASE Asia Pacific, and CASE America Latina. Prior to arriving at CASE, John spent a good deal of his career in higher education, 12 years as Associate Vice Chancellor for Advancement at the University System of Maryland, and also held posts in public relations at Ithaca College and the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington. Mark Stewart is Chief Development and Membership Officer of the Zoological Society of San Diego, and for those of you who think that San Diego is just a zoo and safari park, which is a lot, it's a whole lot more than that, and it has a major commitment to protecting endangered species across the globe. Mark oversees a staff of 64 at the zoo's Global Development and Membership Department. The zoo has the Zoological Society maintains 500,000 adult members and 130,000 child members, all of which have to be renewed every single year. During his time at the Zoological Society, Mark spearheaded the formation of the foundation of San Diego Zoological in 2006 and served as its founding president. Mark also has a background in higher education. Previously, he served as Associate Dean for Development and Alumni Relations at the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine, and also served various positions at Gettysburg College, McDaniel College, and Albion College. So I think you'll agree with me, we do have a really extraordinary group of people with us this afternoon, and we're going to start with some prepared questions before we turn it over to questions from the audience. And John, I'm going to start with you because as Peter just said, giving to education is the second largest recipient of philanthropic dollars. And the giving to education increased 7%, almost double the rate of giving overall in the last year. Now, of course, that represents giving to all education. And we know CASE really focuses on colleges, universities, and independent schools. But CASE produces the CASE Fundraising Index. I understand you produce that twice a year. So when you focus on just higher education, what are you hearing from your members, and to what do you attribute this almost double rate of increase from in the field of education?
Well, first of all, Edith, I just want to say how pleased I am to be part of this conversation again this year, and especially be pleased to be part of it when the numbers are moving in the right direction. As you rightly note, we do, on a semi-annual basis, ask our members to estimate their fundraising results for the 12 months just ended and the 12 months ahead. And when we asked them to estimate in January the 12 months ended for calendar year 2012, they did come back to us with a number very similar to the number that was reported in Giving USA. So I was pleased to see that consistency in terms of the Giving USA number at 7% and what we were hearing from our members. But most important, I think, is the fact that that 7% growth rate actually returns us to the growth rate we were experiencing for the 20 years prior to the recession. So while we're not quite back to the high water mark that we hit in terms of total giving prior to the recession, we have clearly regained our momentum. And if that continues, it's only going to be a matter of another year or two before education giving returns to the high point that it achieved prior to the economic downturn. But to the specific question of why did higher education, or the education sector at large, enjoy a growth rate twice that of other of the total giving that's reported in Giving USA? I think the primary reason, and Peter alluded to this, is that colleges and universities in particular are very successful at attracting major donors. In a university fundraising campaign, for example, the top 10% of donors will provide 90% of the funding. And as Peter also pointed out, high net worth individuals have benefited the most from the post-recession recovery. And that's reflected in that 13% growth rate for Standard & Poor's. It was high net worth individuals who benefited from the uptick in the stock market. That then begs the question, why are major donors attracted to higher education? And I'll give you just a couple of reasons. First, I think it's because colleges and universities promise long-term impact rather than short-term fixes. And Peter's alluded to impact, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that more later in the conversation. Second reason I think that major donors are attracted to higher education is that colleges and universities offer multiple points of connection. For the donor interested in advancing the arts, there's likely to be a connection. For a donor interested in advancing the local economy, there's likely to be a connection. For the donor interested in advancing healthcare, there's likely to be a connection at a college or university. And the final point I would make is that major donors respond well to highly professionalized fundraising programs. And colleges and universities have a long history of investing in their fundraising programs and staffing them with well-qualified individuals. So I think those contributed to the very positive results reflected in Giving USA for colleges, universities, and other educational institutions.
John, thank you. There's a lot of data kind of packed into those statements there, and we'll see if we can unpack some of that as we get deeper into the questioning here. But let me turn to Mark, and let's take a look at giving to environment and animals, which is where the zoos are categorized, although you might argue they could also show up under cultural organizations, because in fact, or even educational organizations, but they are under environment and animals, and they receive about 3% of all giving in this country. But again, here's another situation where giving increased 6.8% from 2011 to 12, which is, again, almost double the rate of increase of giving overall, but it's also almost 3 times the level of increase over the prior 2-year period. So I know you had a particularly good year at the zoo. Tell us a little bit about what your experience was and what you felt drove that. Mark, you may be on the mute.
Sure. 2012 was one of the best years ever for fundraising at San Diego Zoological. Our gifts and pledges, including revocable estate commitments, totaled $59 million, while cash gifts and memberships totaled $55 million, which was an 11% increase over the previous year. We find that slightly different than Giving USA, proportionate in proportions of sources of giving, that individuals and bequests really dominate our giving. It's about 87%. And one of the things that we started just in 2012 as our first real big push into online giving that is not tied to visitation in San Diego was our San Diego Zoo Global Wildlife Conservancy, which in its first year raised $350,000. And I think, Edith, 3 reasons really contributed to our success this last year. We really focused on sharing a great vision for our organization. And we found, and it seems really true over all the years that we've done this work, that when you share a big transformational vision, you get big transformational gifts. Where little vision's given, little gifts are received. We also stopped talking about fundraising totals and shared details about our impact and successes in education and wildlife conservation. And what we really found is that old adage, people want to associate with winners, to be very true. And then lastly, we really focused this last year on challenge gifts. And we have yet to ever lose one, and we find that when you make an authentic challenge, and we write all of ours into our gift agreements that they're really authentic devices, they win for us each and every time. We had one that was a $10,000 challenge that brought in $25,000 in new gifts, and one that was a $9 million challenge that brought in $2 million in gifts. We find that particularly in a tough and recovering market that people really respond well to challenge gifts.
You had some pretty powerful evidence there of the leverage power of those challenges, both at the low end of the spectrum and at the multi-million-dollar level, so very impressive. And mostly what you and John have talked about here is about individual giving. And Judy, I know that represents the majority of the clients at RPA. So we've fortunately seen some increase in individual giving, 3.9% increase in this past year over the prior year. So it feels like donors are starting to feel confident again about the economy, about their ability to make gifts. What are you hearing from your members? What drives their thinking about who they support and why?
Thanks, Edith. It's great to be back. This is my second year back. I want to just acknowledge Campbell and Company and the U.S. Giving Report. We really, in the philanthropic side, really rely on this data. I also want to acknowledge my 500 or 600 colleagues that are on the phone. I wish I could see you, but it also really emphasizes the power of technology, which is driving a lot. Let me tell you a little bit about the perspective that I bring to the table, because RPA in itself, I think, is indicative of, you know, a change that's happening in the philanthropic space that folks should know about. It was a big year for us in that we celebrated our 10th year. So philanthropic advising in itself is a relatively new phenomenon. We're one of the largest, but there's others who've joined the space. And when we talk a little later, I'm going to focus in on why I think many of you who sit in seats of advancement and development, we view you very much as an important part of the philanthropic advising space. But just to give you a little perspective of who we work with, we actually advise both individual donors, institutional donors. We have many private foundations that are also clients, and we also have a growing corporate practice. For individual donors, we tend to work with donors who have the capacity or are currently giving $1 million a year in giving. That's how we kind of measure, you know, our metrics in terms of how much we're advising on. And last year we advised on about $350 million going throughout the U.S. in about 34 countries. So we really also have a global perspective. A couple of points that I just want to focus on that we can delve deeper on that Peter talked about. One, I'm not at all surprised at the energy that's happening in the corporate space. Before I joined RPA, I headed up the Levi Strauss Foundation, so I'm a big supporter of the corporate sector, and we've seen a huge increase in corporate clients coming to us asking for strategic advice. And we tend to really focus on corporations who actually have dollars to put on the ground. I know that there's an increase in non-cash, but we focus on primarily helping corporations figure out how to allocate their resources. There's a lot of energy in this space that we've seen and been tracking in the last 18 months. Most of them are coming saying we want to do our giving more thoughtful, more strategic, a lot of interest in how they can give globally. And they're also looking for strategic partners, strategic nonprofit partners who understand the corporate sector and can also inform them. And when I'm talking about corporate, I'm not talking about marketing dollars. I'm talking about philanthropic dollars. The other trend that we're seeing that Peter talked about, which is music to my ears, is the growth in international giving. And we're seeing several drivers. One, just an increase in global literacy. I have 2 young adult kids, and they've done more traveling in their 20s than I certainly did at that time. We're seeing next gen who are coming in to mom and dad's foundation, and they're saying, yes, of course, you know, we understand the family wants to continue to give locally and the U.S., but they're really pushing the family and the foundations to really look at to take a global lens in their giving. The other thing that we're tracking is diaspora giving. There's growing increase in the immigration population in the U.S. Many of these diaspora givings, they're giving in the U.S., but they are also giving to their country of origin. And then just technology. I mean, folks can sit in their living room and they can see what's happening around the world, both good and bad, and they want to jump in and be a part of that. So I think I'll just stop there. I mean, I could go on, you know, forever because the report really stimulated a lot of issues.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really great to hear you report on such positive trends, and what you're sharing with us here is really all very encouraging. And I would say to our listening audience here that if you haven't been on RPA's website, take a look there because it's rich with material and resources that will help you think about things like borderless giving or diaspora giving or giving in diverse communities, and we'll come back to some of those topics in a minute. But for a number of years, we've been talking about the impact of the recession on giving by individuals, and for a while we saw a real reluctance for donors to think about making multi-year pledges. They were looking for ways to postpone the big gift conversation, or they were concentrating their giving, larger gifts to fewer organizations. I think the latter is still happening. But John, what are your members? What are you seeing in your members in terms of multi-year pledges, willingness to think about big gifts? We certainly have seen some large gifts announced recently, and the role of planned giving.
Well, there are a number of questions embedded in that, Edith. So let me try to take them take them in piece by piece. And I want to first. Or
you can pick and choose.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to reinforce Peter's basic point, which is I think the key driver in these results is the economy. We've seen that throughout history. He showed the charts to demonstrate that. So no matter how you want to measure the positive economic indicators, you can use GDP, you can use Standard & Poor's, you can use household wealth, you can use personal disposable income. All of those factors were in a positive range this past year, and therefore I think are the primary reason that we're seeing the results that we've seen. But the second factor that I would say that has contributed to positive results is not so much what people are doing differently as much as what they continue to do well. And so if I look at colleges and universities, it is the development of deep and lasting relationships and then listening carefully to their donors to find the right connection between the donor's passion and the institution's mission. And one of the things certainly that they're hearing from donors in this current environment is an interest in providing scholarship support. So we are, a number of our member institutions are enjoying great success in raising funds for scholarships because donors recognize that it's not only a growing challenge for students to gain access to affordable, high-quality education, but it's a growing need for our communities and for our country. That said, I don't mean to suggest that institutions aren't doing some innovation and seeing some new trends. In terms of innovations, more and more people are using social media as a form of fundraising and having success with it. They are more at this stage of development about donor acquisition than dollar acquisition. So while they're very important, I don't think social media giving is a primary driver for the positive results in the 2012 Giving USA results. You mentioned a number of other trends. Let me just speak to one of those. Well, no, I'll speak to two of those. One is, I think planned giving absolutely is continuing to grow in importance, and that's for two reasons. One is there's still some uncertainty about the economy, and that's going to continue to cause some donors to opt for planned gifts rather than outright gifts. The great virtue of planned gifts is that they enable donors to be cautious and generous at the same time. The other appeal of planned gifts is that gift annuities in particular right now are particularly attractive in the current interest rate environment because donors can often get a far better guaranteed rate from their alma mater than they can from their bank. As one person said to me recently, charitable gift annuities are the one great tax benefit left for the middle class. So we are seeing, I think, increasing interest in planned giving as part of the trend lines that are occurring. The one thing that I do want to point to that could upset these positive trend lines, and we may want to talk about this a little more later, and that's if there were a significant change in the federal tax treatment of charitable donations. And this has been the conversation around reducing the value of the charitable tax deduction. Were that to occur, then I think a lot of the positive trends you're talking about could be in jeopardy.
And John, thank you for bringing that up. I know CASE has played a major role in this, as have a number of other professional associations, independent sector, and the AFP and others are really tracking this issue. And we really encourage all of you on the phone to pay attention to what's going on in Washington and to respond and react when your organization or the professional association you belong to calls on you to take a stand here, because, as John suggests, that could have a significant, if there were a real serious threat, I mean, if there were to be any action to reduce the value of the charitable deduction, that's going to affect all of us. But I want to kind of flip back to the discussion about multi-year pledges and the many different ways in which people support organizations. And Mark, you had kind of an interesting thought about pledging and matching the pledging to, or the pledge period, to the donor's personal situation. Talk a little bit about how you're managing that.
Sure. In 2012, we received several multi-million-dollar commitments, and the challenge for the donors was that they could not fulfill that commitment in a 5-year period of time, which has been one of the traditions at San Diego Zoological. And so we had to work with 2 donors to be able to make a payment plan work for them that ensured that they could do this gift for us. And we certainly didn't say to them, well, if you can't do it in 5 years, you can't make this gift. So some of these pledge periods are 7 years or more. And what it's done to us internally is that we've then had to give new consideration to some of our cash flow projections, to our project timetables, and then worked with both internal and external sources to secure loans with longer payoff horizons. And we have said that we're much better off having these pledges and these commitments, despite however long they may take to fulfill, than to have to rush a donor or to try to make them do something that just isn't best for them in their personal or professional financial situations.
So it just really reinforces the importance of being very donor-centered in the way in which you talk about a potential gift and the way in which you structure that gift. And Judy, when you and I talked, I was really struck by a comment you made referencing the number of vehicles that some of your families and individuals use to affect their philanthropy. Would you say a word about that and kind of what, you know, how you and they think about that?
Sure, and I think this is a big aha issue for all of us who, you know, are interested in helping donors get thoughtful and effective dollars out on the ground. For a number of years, we've been tracking that many donors have a variety of platforms. A variety of vehicles. It's not uncommon for, let's say, a person in their 40s to be sitting on mom and dad's family foundation. She may have a foundation of her own. She might also have a donor advised fund at a women's fund, might have a donor advised fund at the Jewish Community Federation, might have a donor advised fund in a community where there's a vacation home, doing a significant amount of checkbook giving, might be part of a sort of giving circle model like the Social Venture Partners, which is a great way to promote giving. And often these donors come to us saying, help, how do we help me manage this, help me make sure these giving vehicles are working in alignment. I think as nonprofit leaders, it's perfectly appropriate, as you are getting to know a donor, is to explore how the donor, what type of vehicles the donor has, and how those vehicles might be leveraged. It's we have lots of folks, looking at, charitable remainder trust and charitable lead trust. So, and all of these vehicles often have, in many cases, some strategic guidelines or principles that will be driving the giving. So that's one issue. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about general operating support, multi-year giving. We are really trying to do our part to educate donors about how they can help. We're often asked by donors, believe it or not, how can we make life easier for the nonprofit partners? And one way we think is for the donors to get more comfortable with general operating support. And what we're trying to explain to donors is that in making a general operating support, that doesn't mean that you're giving up impact or accountability. And I think you who are working, especially in the advancement field, can help us spread the word. The other thing that we're also trying to encourage donors, and we certainly did during the recession, is that just about every donor we work with has maybe 3 or 4 organizations that are really near and dear to them. They're going to make a grant to that organization every year. We're saying for those organizations, go ahead and make a multi-year grant, save paper, save energy on the part of you reviewing another proposal and the organization having to do another proposal. So we're seeing that we're making some leeway, but this is an area where we could use some support from the nonprofit sector to help us really promote that message.
Judy, bless you. I mean, this is just music to our ears to know that you're sharing these kinds of messages with your donors. I have a feeling we have people out across the country taking notes right now, and they will shortly be quoting you with their donor population. But what's really interesting is we have seen a shift over the years from unrestricted giving to restricted giving, and particularly at a time now when nonprofit organizations need general operating support. It's really good to hear you say that. We did have a question from the audience that I thought was really interesting, and it was at the time when Peter was talking about giving as in proportion to GDP, and the questioner asked, what are the strategies that we're seeing or using to impact how donors or the public think about philanthropy? If we're going to move giving up as to a higher percentage of GDP, we have to help them think about the important role that they can play, how they can make an impact with their gift. Certainly, Judy, some of the comments you made about the importance of general operating support, I think, play into that. Other thoughts from some of our panelists on that topic? Because I think it's a really important one.
Well, Edith, this is John. If I could just weigh in on that. First of all, I think it's important to note the fact that actually, as a percentage of GDP, the United States is one of the most generous countries in the world. So we start from a very good place. And I'll just use this as another opportunity to point out the fact that one of the reasons that is the case is because we have incentives in the tax code for giving, incentives that countries around the world are actually looking at emulating. So if we want to at least continue at the current level and perhaps increase the percentage of giving or the value of giving as a percentage of GDP, it is going to require enlightened government policy.
Edith, this is Mark from the zoo. One thing that, from our perspective, that we do to really help develop even greater major gift support than we have currently is we make philanthropy ubiquitous across our organization. You can't go anywhere at our zoo, at our safari park, on our website without seeing the impact of philanthropy. And with all of the key messages that we have our educators, animal handlers, and staff in general talk about, we make sure to talk about philanthropy. One of the great stories we have is of our most generous donor who's given $25 million to the organization, came here at a time when his life was giving him a lot of trouble, and he just wanted to sit in front of the polar bears and just to watch the polar bears and to have joy through them, and just enjoyed our staff who just let him do what he wanted to do, and just came to know our staff from a very general visitor perspective. And so we share that story with all of our staff to say, the next Conrad Previs may be walking through the zoo right now. What are you going to do to ensure that a future philanthropist is going to join us and be a part of our zoo family?
You know, Mark, you're making a really important point. Oh, Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to take sort of a different take on it, and it really is coming from really our perspective, which is how do we educate donors to be thoughtful and strategic and really understand the needs of the nonprofit sector. One of the questions I often ask when I'm speaking to a group of donors is, you know, what do you think is the #1 revenue source of the nonprofit sector? And invariably, most of them say, well, it's philanthropy, of course, because from their point of view, every nonprofit in the world is asking them to contribute. And we all know that actually philanthropic dollars really is at the bottom of the revenue sources. Most nonprofits rely on government grants. They're trying to be smart and thoughtful with earned income, and certainly philanthropy is important. We think this is an important message to get across. One, because we're trying to educate donors that over the last few years, nonprofits have, you know, been hit, you know, with what we say, you know, the 3 whammies. There's been, you know, decrease in government, earned income, especially for arts organizations, has taken a hit, and philanthropy dollars, it's coming back. And so one of the things that, again, I'm asking your help is that as you tell your story of why you need multi-year gifts and general operating support, and it's to help them understand that you know, that nonprofits are being really thoughtful and creative or what have you, but there are resources that are going to be needed, you know, from all sectors. And we just, you know, we also feel strongly that, you know, we can't have government pull out, and we have to support organizations that rely on earned income too. It's really telling the story and really educating the donors so they'll have a better understanding. A great report that if you haven't seen, you should see, is a national report by the Nonprofit Finance Fund, which really talks in layman's language about both the challenges and opportunities that are impacting the finances of the nonprofit sector.
Judy, I'm glad you brought that up because there's been a lot of talk here in Chicago, kind of led by the Donors Forum, and it may be happening in other parts of the country as well, about the importance of talking very openly about direct costs. It is a cost of running the organization, and I think we're often uncomfortable having that conversation. Some funders won't allow you to include that in the proposal. I think it's an education job that we all need to do. Yes, as Mark suggests, we need to tell the larger story, kind of paint the vision of what the organization is hoping to accomplish, but it's also important to help to put that story about the importance of philanthropy in the context of how the organization works. Well, you know, we're dealing with pretty sophisticated donors at the high end and also at the low end, but helping them, really educating them about what it takes to function effectively as a nonprofit organization is something that we all can learn to do better. There have been a number of questions from the audience that we're kind of moving over in that direction about the role of capital campaigns in driving some of the big gifts. And Mark, I know you're in a capital campaign, and John, you have a number of members who are announcing or have announced really very significant goals. Well, Mark, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about how you've been in the campaign even during the recession. You've obviously been able to manage your way through that. Are things improving? Are you seeing a different situation? And John, I'll come back to you.
Sure. We're in the 3rd year of a 7-year, $400 million campaign, and we're right on track with where we had hoped to be, and even have a verbal commitment for a 9-figure gift that would be an estate commitment. But I think there are 3 things that are in our favor in our campaign that other institutions can definitely look to in consideration of their campaigns. First, at San Diego Zoo Global, we're thoroughly committed to say what we do and do what we say. We've established really deep and meaningful trust equity with our supporters over the years who trust us with their dollars because we have delivered on them time and time again. Second, our stewardship of donors is really unrivaled. We recognize that keeping a donor happy and feeling well appreciated is key to donor retention, and retention is so much easier and so much better than acquisition. And probably one of our very best tools for stewardship is scrapbooking. Yes, scrapbooking. Our scrapbooks are beloved by shut-in seniors, corporate CEOs, and those tied to Hollywood. When you deliver a scrapbook, they know this was made just for them and is something that all three cherish. And then just lastly, we make sure that we have a really compelling vision. For us, we aim to be a world leader connecting people to wildlife and conservation. And as I mentioned earlier, this vision is shared across all of our communication platforms, on-site and online, and we found it really compelling to our donor and prospective donors.
I've had the privilege of seeing some of the scrapbooks that the staff at the zoo prepare for their donors, and they're pretty amazing. I mean, people just love those pictures of themselves with the animals. And I know all of you across the country don't necessarily have animals that you can include in your photos, but you certainly can bring donors in for site visits. And to the extent to which you record those visits and remind donors of the impactful time they had with you, it really goes a long way towards stewardship. John, capital campaigns in higher education?
Yeah, well,
are they spiraling out of control? What's going on here?
They're certainly not spiraling out of control. And I actually want to go back to a point that Mark made earlier on, which is while we talk about these campaigns and the very large dollar goals, the conversation really should be about the impact that the campaigns have in enabling colleges and universities and schools to educate students, to contribute to society. So the campaigns are very important. They continue to demonstrate their value. On average, an institution will generate something on the order of 40% more over the course of a campaign than they would if they were not, during that same period, if they were not in a campaign. So they have great value to the institution. And indeed, there was significant pent-up demand during the recession. So if you look just at the billion-dollar-plus campaigns in colleges and universities, last year we had Duke, Ohio State, University of Miami, Boston University all announced campaigns. This year so far, we've had Johns Hopkins and University of Iowa announce. And this fall, we expect that Harvard will announce its long-awaited campaign. So there are now 30 active campaigns at the level of $1 billion or more, and many more examples below that figure, and I suspect many more announcements to come. You know, if you consider the fact that a campaign is, just as Mark's is, on average about 7 or 8 years in length, and that we tend to go through an economic downturn roughly every 7 to 8 years, now's a great time to get out there and launch your campaign before that next downturn hits.
Really good advice. I hope we have a number of years before that next downturn happens.
Yeah.
Still recovering from the last
Indeed.
one. I want to go back to the question of corporations because there have been several questions about corporate giving. And Judy, I was really delighted to hear you say that you're working with corporations that are giving cash as well as in-kind, but they are also focusing their giving more to giving more money to fewer organizations and those organizations that really whose mission is consistent with their corporate social responsibility. Is that a trend that we're going to see continue? What does that mean for corporate general operating support? I mean, Peter referenced that it's not, we're not going to see it at the levels that we used to. Is that going to continue? Judy, you may be on mute.
Hello.
Judy, are you still with us? We seem to have lost Judy for a moment. Mark, I know you have a different situation in San Diego with corporations.
Yes, we do. San Diego is not a city with a significant number of Fortune 500 headquarters. And what we've found that many of our larger corporate donors have really tied their giving to mirror their short-term quarterly focus that they face with investors rather than a long-term, long-view strategic direction. It's sometimes very frustrating for us as we then have to pivot and navigate and try to match up with these new fast-changing directions. But as corporate giving is really so tied to corporate marketing, we've just had to learn to become much more flexible to work with these donors and potential partners.
And Edith, if I can weigh in on corporate giving in the higher education. Okay, in the higher education community, corporations actually represent an even larger percentage of all donations than they do for the charitable sector at large. So roughly 15% of giving to colleges and universities comes from corporations. So needless to say, I'm very pleased by seeing that strong growth in corporate giving. And yes, indeed, corporations give based on their social responsibility goals, but they also give based on their business development goals. And it's, I think the point that Mark was just making is being able to tie into those business development goals. Companies want a return on their philanthropic investments just as they do with any of their other investments. And you've also alluded to the fact that there is an increase in in-kind giving, or Peter did, particularly from pharmaceutical companies, and that's an important and welcome part of corporate philanthropy. It does create some challenges in determining the true value of those gifts at times, but as I think we've commented several times, in the end it's the impact, it's not the dollar value.
Yeah, indeed. And Judy, when you and I were talking earlier, you talked about the importance of corporate support. I mean, yes, the money is important, but also the leadership that a corporation can give to an issue or to a cause.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Dee,
okay.
Thank you.
Yes, you know, I would just encourage nonprofits to really think about all of the assets that a corporation can bring to the issue. Not only cash, but of course employees, but also the clout of the corporation. I headed up the Levi Strauss Global Giving for about 10 years, and when I started, the AIDS epidemic was just imploding, and very few corporations felt comfortable stepping forward. And although the Levi Strauss Foundation provided cash, when we really talked to our nonprofit partners, they said the most important asset that we brought to the table was Bob Haas, who was CEO at the time, really standing up and really encouraging the business community to join him in raising awareness in the global fight against AIDS. So the smart nonprofits really understand the variety of assets. It was really at Levi's that, you know, I first was able to leverage and utilize, you know, an impact giving. We were interested in getting economic development started in the East Bay. There was a community bank being started, and we were considering a grant, and really the bank said, you know, what we really want is a loan to help us, you know, develop, you know, our credit rating. So, of course, impact giving and the assets that not only a corporation but other donors can bring, there are a variety of tools in donors' toolkit, and we're educating donors about the various tools that they can bring to the table. But often, again, and I feel like a broken record, often the nonprofit who's really informed about the variety of new tools that can leverage and support the mission, often the first person who really tells the donor about these options could be actually the organization, seeking the support.
Yeah, it's really very thoughtful advice. I mean, it's the old adage, if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money. But if you can ask for advice, you can get a whole lot more than money. And that's really your point about really thinking about all the assets that a corporation can bring to the table and thinking about the many ways in which they can be helpful to a nonprofit organization. We're seeing a huge increase in skills-based volunteerism, where a corporation will make employees available who have a particular set of skills, whether it's in technology or marketing, to help a local nonprofit organization with a particular, clearly defined challenge or opportunity. In just a few minutes left, I want to just touch on one other topic. And Judy, I know it's one you've written quite a bit about. John, you have an initiative in this area. Mark would be looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that. And that, we know the demographics of the giving community are changing dramatically. And, what we need to be thoughtful about is how we intersect with these philanthropists from different communities, whether these are communities of color or women donors or LGBT or international donors. Judy, let me start with you and just share your perspective on that.
Yeah, this is an issue that we have, been tracking and noticing, an increased amount of activity. And I would say it's an area that, we feel that the nonprofit community, I think many of the smart ones are beginning to understand the demographic shifts. I mean, it's really a global phenomenon. I mean, the richest person, in the world is a Mexican. And we talked about the diaspora giving, but this issue became really important to us as we joined with the Kellogg Foundation to really identify and raise awareness about different giving trends and different diverse communities, ranging from women to the LGBT community. I became so frustrated in feeling that there was a lack of awareness and appreciation of giving in diverse communities that I created a video with the help of the D5 Coalition called I Am a Philanthropist. I went out and interviewed diverse donors to ask them to talk about their philanthropic journey. And if you're interested, it's on YouTube. It's also on our website. And what we've been hearing from diverse donors is that they're often misunderstood, often not engaged by many mainstream organizations. There's an assumption that, for example, as an African American, I might only be interested in supporting issues in the African American community, of which I do, but guess what? I care deeply about the environment, about the arts. They often feel that they don't have the benefit of the really smart philanthropic advice that often comes with engaging a development professional. They don't see the cultural competencies in many of the organizations, and they find that it's really hard for them to find other donors who look like them. We think this is a really missed opportunity, both in celebrating the diversity in diverse communities, but it's a missed opportunity also in engaging donors where their resources are growing, their interest and commitment, and their tradition of giving is not being tapped.
Judy, thank you. It's obviously an area of great potential that we all need to be much more thoughtful and become much more competent in dealing with. I've become so engrossed in the conversation I've lost track of time. I do want to leave just a couple minutes at the end for each of you to kind of give your final thoughts. But John, is there anything you want to say on the issue of diverse donors?
Just very quickly, I think part of the reason for the understanding is there's frankly, a lack of diversity within the fundraising profession itself, and particularly at our member institutions. And they are aware of it. We're very aware of it. And we think that needs to change in order to better reflect the diverse population of donors and the diverse population at large. So one of the areas that we think has great potential is working with students while they're in college to attract them to fundraising careers, because that student population is so much more diverse than the certainly the fundraising officers that are currently working in colleges and universities. So I think if we can diversify the profession itself, we have the potential to diversify the donor base.
Amen.
And thank you for all the good work that Case is doing on that front. So as we come into the final minutes here, I'm going to ask each of the panels for a word of advice for our audience as they head back to the office. Mark, I know you're working on a book called, is it the 22 Immutable Laws of Fundraising? Can you give us one or two of those?
Sure, and we're still working on what that number of immutable laws may end up being, but it's very much based on recent Trout's 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I think probably the one thing that we're most focused on at San Diego Zoological that I think has wide implications for anyone in the nonprofit community is we're really focused on individuals. Individuals, as the Giving USA report reconfirms, are the backbone of philanthropy. And so we're really focused on sharing how our organization will make individuals' goals and aspirations, not necessarily ours, but individuals' goals and aspirations become real, and that they're giving through us instead of giving to us. And we believe that's going to determine our success for 2013.
Great thought for all of us to carry back to the office. John, a word of advice from you?
I guess I'd want the takeaway to be that we can stop looking back and talking about the recession and start looking forward and talking about the opportunities that lie ahead. I think there's lots of reason to be optimistic about the future, that we'll be having some very positive conversations next year on this webinar when we see the 2013 results for Giving USA. And then finally, if you'll forgive me for harping on this, but I would encourage everyone to contact their members of Congress and urge them to preserve the charitable tax deduction. For colleges and universities, we estimate that if deductions were capped at 28%, which is a proposal that's floating out there, it would be the equivalent to 300,000 scholarships for deserving students, and we simply do not want that to happen.
Wow, that's a very powerful message. And I promise you, next year on the Giving USA webinar, we're not going to use the R word at all. We're going to hold it to it. And Judy, I know you've got, what do you call it, the Belk's Common Sense Checklist. Give us an item or two.
I'll only focus on two or three. One is, I feel like I often do my job. It's a big deal for me to get a busy donor out in the community, out to make a site visit. I think I often do that, and then often the story is not told in a compelling way for the donor to understand. I can't tell you the number of times I've left, a site visit with the donor and they're scratching their head. No, I'm not quite. Did they ask me for something, or what is it that they're doing? What's the focus? And so I would just remind everyone what Peter said in his comments, that really, yes, there's been a growth in family foundations, but you really have to think of these as individuals. You've got to really find ways of engaging them, before the ask and after the ask, and telling your story. And second, I just want to officially deputize all of you on the call as a philanthropic advisor. We know in terms of what we hear from donors that they want to tap your brain not only in how they might support your organization, but they want you to be interested in their entire philanthropic story. And so I think you'll win a lot of points by not only, of course, making the pitch and helping them understand your organization, but really try to find out what their interests are. You know, even encourage them, you know, to talk to another organization that also might fit their needs. I will assure you it would come back to you developing a deeper relationship with that donor. I've seen it happen time and time again. And then I finally just want to salute all of you. Those of us who are working on this side of the table, we cannot do our job without a vibrant, healthy nonprofit sector. And I know it's tough out there in terms of raising funds and delivering quality services. I just wanted to salute you for all the work that you do.
Judy, thank you. And I want to thank all of our panelists, John, Mark, Judy, for really engaging discussion. This has been great, and I know I've really enjoyed it, and I think I hear clapping all across the country. So thank you very much, and let's go out and make 2013 a record year for philanthropy, and we'll see you all here at the Giving USA webinar next year. Have a good summer, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
There is information on the screen, by the way, on how you can get information, how you can access the Giving USA reports, and if you have more questions about some of the material we covered today, please send us an email at info@campbellcompany.com, and we will send out the responses to all of you in, well, give us a week or so. Take care. Bye-bye.